welcome to day 2 of the 2024 5th International Conference on Audio for Virtual and Augmented Reality. I'm Lawrence Schwedler. I'm the Director of the Music and Sound Design Programs here at the DigiPen Institute in Redmond, Washington. We're glad you could join us here in person, and for those of you watching the live stream, hey out there, speaking to you from the past. I wanted to remind you today first, I wanted to give a special call out to our sponsors. I just wanted to start right off with that. First, our platinum sponsor, Meta Reality Labs, who gave a fabulous social event last night. I think most of you were there, so I just want a round of applause for Meta because these guys are awesome. Thank you. Thanks for letting me manipulate you. And then we have our gold sponsors, Treble and Brandenburg Labs, and they're right next to Meta, right across the hall. They're in Lord. Meta is in Bernini. And right next to them are our platinum trade show sponsors, and that's 5 companies, Fraunhofer, Dolby, Philips, Qualcomm, and Nokia. And they are in the next room in Rembrandt. So if you haven't, we got today and tomorrow, you've got to check out these demos. There's some really cool stuff. And then don't miss, upstairs, we have HBK and Head Acoustics. So you have to go up the stairs, and they're lonely up there. So go and visit them and see their demos and talk to them as well. Also, the posters from last night's session are still up, and they'll be there if you want to check those out. All right, let's see. I wanted to remind you that the conference schedule, you don't have to scan this particular code. It's the same one. It's all over. I think all of you know by now, but if you scan the code, you'll get to the schedule and you can see what's going on. And then also the Wi-Fi is, the password is dragons with an exclamation point, lowercase, in case you haven't had that. Finally, I wanted to remind you all that tonight, from 5 o'clock to 7:30 is the banquet. It's right here at DigiPen, so we're not going to get on a bus like we did in 2018 and go to Woodinville. We're going to stay right here like we did in 2022. So right here in the Bites Cafe, and that's complimentary. It's included with your registration, of course. So join us. There will be also complimentary beer and wine, and that's served from 5 p.m. until 7:30. Although we're going to, now that it's, I don't know if it'll be raining tonight, but if it's not raining, we'll open the doors to the patio and the parking lot in the back, and you can stay until 10 o'clock. We did that in 2022, and it was really fun. So I think that's all. Did I get everything, Remy?
I think so.
I think I got everything.
Yeah.
Well,
we still have food as well throughout the day, snacks starting at 8 a.m. Some of you were here this morning, and lunch from 12 to 2.
Right. I'll let Remy introduce today's keynote speaker.
All right. Thanks, Lauren. So yes, it is my great pleasure to introduce our second day keynote speaker, Dr. Annika Neidhardt. Annika has been working in the field of spatial audio and virtual acoustics for about 15 years, and currently a senior research fellow at the University of Surrey in the UK. She holds a master's degree in automation and robotics from the TU in Chemnitz, as well as a master's degree in audio engineering from the University of Music and Performing Art in Graz. She has contributed in her career to hi-fi systems for automotive, as well as 3D audio technology for cinema with Sono and then Fraunhofer. She, before starting to conduct her own research, her PhD thesis was on the plausibility of simplified room representations in the lab of Carl Brandenburg at the TU Ilmenau, and in fact her work contributed to starting the Brandenburg Lab company, which is one of our sponsors across the hall. So she's now, as I mentioned, at the Institute of Sound Recording in Surrey, and joined the group doing research on room acoustics and sound field modeling, and looking at perceptual optimization of different methods for creating spatial auditory illusions over headphone for virtual and augmented reality. So very appropriate for our conference, and thank you very much for joining us, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's a great honor to be here and to be invited for this talk. I'm sorry, I might not be the freshest version of myself because I'm still quite jet-lagged, but you are welcome to use your AR glasses and use the Beautify app and apply it to me. So sometimes we don't want the full reality, right? But my talk will be about how to embed auditory illusions in the world or into the world around us. Just a short comment maybe about the world around us. So these are strange times out there, and if we follow the news, it's not always fun, right? So I think it's important that if we get this opportunity to be here and worry about auditory illusions, we should appreciate that, right? So I think that's something we should always keep in mind while being on such a conference. It's not just problems, it's awesome, right? But augmented reality matters. Recently I came across a paper about research that is going on where augmented reality is used to treat spider phobia. So if you are afraid of spiders, you can use this augmented reality app, and then you can have a confrontation with the spiders. And of course, spiders are not a good example because creating virtual spiders does not require so much audio. But maybe you're afraid of something else that makes noise, right? Then we could use it. So augmented reality can be useful in healthcare, really. So there's actually a lot of research going on how to implement that in psychological treatment for phobia, for depression, for ADHD, also for social anxiety. It's a great tool already, but it will become better, we know, right? For education, it will help enhance learning by providing interactive and immersive experiences that will help to make complex concepts more understandable. It has already helped a lot in creating social exchange while everybody had to stay at home, right? So it will continue to do that and might get better even. And it's a very new and super interesting platform for every artist who wants to explore new concepts. I mean, you can do so much with it. The possibilities are really endless, and I think it's up to us and everybody who's excited about it to come up with new ideas, right? So, but that's also just a very small selection of things where augmented reality can be interesting. Probably I don't need to tell you, it's also your topic of the job, of your research. But yeah, augmented reality can help to make the life of some people better. So this is why we should work on it, and it can only do it if it works, right? So we have to worry about how it works. So let's discuss how to embed auditory illusions in a listener's natural environment. So if we look for a very easy and very effective approach, then we just measure binaural room impulse responses in a certain position in the room, and then we place the listener there and let this person listen to what we just recorded. It's usually pretty good for everybody, right? So we have here a measurement setup that I used. I think it's so good because in these cases the auditory sense aligns with all the other senses pretty well, which gives a good, provides good conditions to be very convincing as an illusion. If we use a dummy head or if we use our own ears, that can make a difference, right? So measuring with your own ears would be the best case. And there was a very meaningful study by Fabian Brinkmann and his colleagues in 2017. He was also pretty active as a test person. There they really put a lot of effort into making everything right in the measurement, right? And so they used individual measurements in exactly that position and just for a very small range of angles, and with these extra aural headphones that are far away so that they don't really influence the sound field and over the heads, over the ears. And with this setup, they achieved the great authenticity. So that means perceptual indistinguishable from the real version. of the sound field or of the virtual sound source. And that has been a very historic moment, actually, in binaural audio, or general in created illusions, right? Because in the visual field, they are not there yet. So audio is really special about that. Here we can already achieve illusions or create illusions that are not distinguishable from reality anymore. And in this case, to be fair, it only worked for speech. They also used it, noise bursts. And there, the listeners could clearly distinguish it. But it was an AVX test setup, which is very critical. And maybe we don't even need that it's perfectly indistinguishable, but just the acceptance as real, so that we cannot tell anymore that it's an illusion, is already the interesting thing, right? And we can achieve that with audio, and also quite like it's not a rare experience anymore. So a lot of people that are here in the room, for example, have experienced that already. And so with that, we are far ahead of the other modalities, especially the visual field. I had the opportunity to participate in some interdisciplinary discussion groups about plausibility and how to evaluate the perception of illusions. And there really nobody was aware of any other modality that has achieved that. Okay. So, but sure, it was a lot of work in this experiment to make everything right. So they have really put a lot of effort and time into measuring that accurately. But we do not only want to sit there and move the head in a slight, in a very small angle range. So actually what we are interested in is 6 degrees of freedom, so that we can move around freely. And for that we would have to measure each possible position and each orientation that the listener can take later on. And if we want to have a moving source in addition to a moving listener, then we have to do all the measurements for all the listening positions, and again for each source position again. So that's in total super many measurements, and nobody wants to do that. I can tell you that's just a small setup of measurements I conducted, and I really was annoyed after that, and I never wanted to do any measurements anymore again. I still did afterwards, but anyway, it's a lot of work, tedious, time-consuming. And if we follow the spatial sampling Nyquist criterion, we would have to have a very dense grid of measurements. Like, for example, if we want to have the sound fields like continuously determined for up to 8 kilohertz, we would need a 2 centimeter grid. Nobody wants to measure that, right? So, and I also conducted an experiment on the perception of the minimum BRIR grid resolution for position changes. And there it was obvious that with different signals it was very different. So for speech, for example, already 10 centimeters were worse than 5 centimeters. So there we should really use the 5 centimeters. With continuous white noise it was pretty similar. With low frequent noise it was all right. There we could use 15 centimeters maybe. But with I had a solo saxophone which started very impulse-like, and that didn't work at all. So even 5 centimeters caused noticeable discontinuities, and sometimes 5 centimeter resolution was still not enough. I have to say that I didn't conduct this experiment because I thought, okay, let's have a very dense grid and everything will be fine. I don't think that, but it was motivated by the idea of creating a measured reference, because it's also very difficult to find good references when you investigate interpolation algorithms, right? So you always have reality, but then you always have the issue with the headphones, that the headphones might be in the way and might be occluding some of the sound. So I tried to come up with a measured reference that I can compare with the modified BRARs that I wanted to investigate. So that was the motivation behind this study. But luckily there are some helpers for measurements. They have been developed in different universities, or different universities have come up with solutions for that. For example, here's a model that was developed and used at Aalto University. That's, I think, built based on a Roomba robot that drives around and covers a certain grid. A similar solution was set up or developed in Ilmenau at the university. There we have this microphone array on the top. In the University of Illinois, they had an interesting, different solution, which they call spider robot. But it really can do also different heights, so that makes it very interesting. I also have another super interesting solution to show you, but it's a video that I didn't want to download, so that's their website. I just will show it to you quickly. Another robot they built to conduct binaural measurements. So that's like 8 times the speed it usually does, so right, it's not measuring like that, but I think it's a quite interesting solution. So anyway. And then there's also, for example, in Luzern, a robot that really drives around a Keynote dummy head. Also like it's this Omron, but it's a similar principle as the Roomba robot. Yes, so nice. We don't have to do the measurements ourselves. That's great news. Here we have an example of a grid that was covered by the Ilmenau robot. You can find more information in this reference here. But of course, the required numbers of measurements for a smooth or continuous auralization depends on the auralization method. We do not always need this kind of dense grid, but we can use interpolation methods, extrapolation methods, parametric descriptions to reduce the amount of measurements we need, right? And they have many works or many approaches have been proposed to deal with that, or how we could do this. For example, dynamic time warping, or an interpolation based on the shaping of the initial time delay gap, or different approaches really. And more and more there is interesting work also for this sound field reconstruction. Currently mostly still for monaural room impulse responses, but it's extending to binaural, like for example the study we presented yesterday here, where we created or extracted the sound field description based on equivalent sources that are distributed around this sound field. With that, you can, once you have this extracted sound field description, you can auralize it in different ways for different setups. For headphones, for dynamic headphone reproduction, you can create all the BRIRs for like in the resolution you want. And you can also use loudspeaker-based reproduction for that. And then there was a very interesting different approach, which is mostly perceptually motivated, and it's very handy because it only requires the measurement of one binaural. No, it creates binaural auralization based on the measurement of one single mono room impulse response, and basically extends that. And maybe we don't need to go through all the details. If you're interested in more details and don't know it yet, then please have a look at their paper. But for me, it is interesting that this will not create a physically accurate or correct sound field representation, but it is still perceptually pretty convincing. And so simplifications are possible in these dynamic auralizations, but it requires a good understanding of the perception so that we can really make use of it in the right places. So perceptual requirements is kind of my field of study, or I have done my PhD in this field. So the main question that is interesting for us there is, how accurate does it have to be? So how accurately do we need to recreate the physical sound field? How accurately do we have to model the room responses or the room acoustics in this listening area. And especially in the augmented reality case where the virtual contents are presented next to the real contents, it can be tricky to get that right. There the requirements, the perceptual requirements, are a bit more challenging than for VR maybe. And as Remy introduced in this introduction, I did my PhD in the lab of Karl-Heinz Brandenburg, and he gave the keynotes like on the last 2 AVAR conferences, and there he presented a diagram that I want to show you again here, which is showing the room divergence effect. It's a study that was conducted by my colleagues in Ilmenau, by Stefan Werner and Florian Klein and Thomas Malfeld. And it shows that if the sound or the room we reproduce over headphones is different from the room we are in, that it affects the externalization index. But what I want to do now is show some more plots of this study. Here we can see the 0-degree head orientation, so that listener or that these BRIRs were looking into the direction of the sound source. Okay, let's do that first. The 2 rooms that have been used here are the listening lab with a reverberation time of 0.3 seconds and the seminar room with a reverberation time of 2.0. That's quite reverberant. It was an empty room. It was actually super reverberant, and the difference between the 2 was pretty big. They had an equal size of about 180 cubic meters. And usually we have living rooms are in a range of reverberation times up to 0.7 seconds, roughly, and classrooms are in a similar range. Sometimes seminar rooms, especially those in Ilmenau, they can be up to 1 second approximately. Yes, but it's not so typical that we have seminar rooms like this 2-second long reverberation time. So in most AR application scenarios, the deviation will be considerably smaller than between those 2 rooms. So that is really looking into an extreme case, right? Yes, and now what I wanted to show you before, the 90-degree orientation. So when the listener or the BRIR was like facing away to the side, we know that there the externalization is generally better, right? In front it's always difficult, and at the side it's usually much better already. So that is what we can see here too. And the differences between the rooms are still there, so it's still a bit beneficial to have the same room acoustics. You can see that in here. But actually they are all above 0.6 in the externalization index, so we can discuss what that means, like what did the listeners perceive there? Was it really internal? Probably not, so I think there was still a certain externalization, and for externalization we also know that there's a certain connection to the distance perception, especially in how the participants rate that. So if it's a bit further away, they might tend to say, okay, externalization is better, although maybe the distance is just further away, right? So there it's not completely clear what we measure here. And another interesting plot from that same study is this one. Here the different lines, they do not indicate different rooms, but KK means dummy head, Kunstkopf in German, dummy head, and the IN is the individualized version. And there we can see we have the listening lab and the listening lab. There the individualized has a much better externalization. Even when the room is wrong, the individualized has better externalization. We have the seminar room and the listening lab. Again, the individualized has better externalization, and so on. So the individualization in this study mattered really a lot for the externalization. But let's look again at the 90-degree case. There, most of this effect is gone, and can also see that the rooms that are reproduced in another room still achieve a pretty good externalization. What I'm trying to say is that externalization is a challenge. So we have to keep track of externalization when we create augmented reality illusions. But it is not the most critical attribute. And I will show you another study that we conducted, which showed a difference or a more critical construct that we should maybe put more focus on, in my opinion. So in this study, we used my 2-meter line of measured binary room impulse responses. So you could walk towards a loudspeaker with these 9 positions and all head orientations. And with the details are maybe not important, but we stretched the late reverberation envelope, or we compressed it so that we could modify the reverberation time of the actual room. The early part was completely the same, so the early reflections were always correct, and the direct sound was always correct, like we measured it. Just the late reverberation was modified. One time it was shorter, so we used different scaling factors for this compression or stretching. So we had the case of the original reverberation time in this room was about 1 second. So if we reduce it by 0.6, then we had 0.6 reverberation time in the reproduction. And so we had these different reverberation times from 0.6 to 1.8 in a room that actually has a reverberation time of 1 second. And we asked participants to rate externalization and audiovisual plausibility. On the one hand, while stationary in one position, just looking towards the loudspeaker, and then again in the position dynamics, so when the people were walking towards the sound source. And they all had to rate both on a 6-point scale. And here's the result for externalization. So we have two anchor conditions, which are really considerably drier. There we can see that the externalization was affected. But really modifying the reverberation time in this range that we tested did not significantly affect the externalization. So that shows that we have quite a range of reverberation times, or quite a tolerance in the reverberation time we can work with. So that's interesting to notice. But you can also see that this range is completely within the extreme cases that have been tested in the other study. So I think if we would get more extreme with the scaling of this reverberation time, we might also get there, right? That at some point the externalization will break. But what I'm trying to show is that we have a certain range of tolerance in which we can work where it might be not that critical. Yes, and the results for audiovisual plausibility. There we can see that, at least in the stationary case, for the shortest reverberation time, we had an effect, or actually also for the very long reverberation times. In both cases, the audiovisual plausibility was affected. For the short reverberation times, the sound source really kind of moved in front of the real loudspeaker. So we saw the real loudspeaker there, but it was playing over headphones, right? And the apparent sound source kind of moved in front of that. So it came a bit closer. So it was not audiovisually aligned anymore. And with the longer reverberation times, it really moved behind the loudspeaker and became more fuzzy, and to a degree where it really wasn't audiovisually aligned anymore, the loudspeaker we saw and the sound source we heard. And that is, I think, the more critical attribute that we should pay attention to, that if we have a visual representation of the sound source, and it has to align audiovisually in the same position, then that's very sensitive to wrong reverberation, because especially early reflections can affect the localization. slightly. And especially the distance perception, right? That is what we noticed here. Okay, so that's interesting. Audiovisual plausibility is affected by smaller deviations in reverberation time than externalization, and is therefore the more critical more critical for evaluating matching reverb. So, okay. Another interesting question is when we get into a room that we haven't heard before as listeners, which role does the visual impression play? So, I mean, on the one hand, we just discussed that the visual impression of having a sound source there and the having a visual sound source there and having the actual virtual sound source slightly next to it, it broke the plausibility. So that already says, okay, the visual impression of the sound source matters for room alignment in augmented reality. So the auditory impression has to align with the visual impression. For example, in localization, in the size and the shape and the direction. Yes, and room acoustics and early reflections can have a strong effect there, if they are wrong. But then we also have the visual impression of the room and the question how it contributes. That question is also discussed in the room divergence study, where they conducted a part of the experiment in the dark and concluded that it doesn't have an effect. So I think, or also my impression is that audio is slightly dominating in what we expect. But I think the visual impression still matters. And how can we investigate that? So if we see a room, what do we expect? That can be investigated with an VR environment with rooms that we don't know. So we only see them and we cannot hear them. And this is what we also did in an experiment. We had this virtual reality representation of an office that doesn't exist. It's just a creation, and of this server room. And we had 3 different sizes of each of the 2, and asked participants to adjust the reverberation time, or actually the acoustic room size of the SDN model, scalar delay network model that we used for the reverberation rendering. And another slider that adjusted the absorption coefficient to get to a certain T60 or to a certain reverberation time. So these 2 sliders could be used and they were not labeled, so the participants did not know what they adjust, but they just heard it. They were asked to adjust the reverberation so that it fits the room they see. And it was quite interesting. So first, the T60 results that, maybe I used this laser. Is it there? There we go. The small room, or the blue and red symbols here, they indicate the office. The small room, which was modified between 30 cubic meters up to 120 cubic meters. So there you can see that the expected reverberation time depends a lot on the size, the visual size of the room. And for the server room, a similar trend could be observed, but the slope was not as steep. And for the acoustic size of the room, we had a similar trend, but we created some models that showed how much the visual impression contributes, the visual size impression contributes, and it's still quite small. And you can also see the results of the different participants. They are quite spread out, so the expectations vary a lot between the different listeners, and so that's always interesting to keep in mind, that the expectations of the individuals can be very different and vary considerably among each other. But visual impression does play a role and what we expect in terms of reverberation. And here I have another interesting case where also the audiovisual impression played an important role. I had again this 2-meter line of measured room impulse responses in this seminar room, and this time the loudspeakers were turned around, facing away from the listening line. And with these binary room impulse responses, we created different modifications, and they are not there to study how well we can interpolate between the different positions, but they were really created to challenge plausibility, to see how far we can go with the modification until plausibility breaks. Because we noticed already that there's quite this tolerance range in which we can work pretty conveniently without having too much of trouble with the plausibility. But it was really the goal of the study to find a case where it breaks. And I succeeded. So one test case was that left and right channel were swapped after the direct sound. And one test case was that after the direct sound, the reverberation was kept constant. So over the line, when you could walk towards the loudspeaker and past the loudspeaker, it was always the same early reflection pattern, so nothing changed, only the direct sound. And then there was a test case where the same modifications were done, but just starting after 50 milliseconds, which is the predicted mixing time. So we had these two modifications, left and right swap, and the constant reverberation, once after the direct sound and once after the mixing time. So these were the test cases. And this was compared also to the measured reference to the original. And audiovisual plausibility had to be rated, and the similarity to the measured reference was evaluated. And here are the results. So the direct case, which is when the loudspeakers are facing towards this listening line, there it was really interesting to see that even these severe modifications of the early reflection pattern did not have an effect on plausibility. So when we are moving in front of the loudspeaker where the direct sound is strong, there we can basically do whatever we want with these early reflections, and it's fine. It doesn't matter, the plausibility is still all right. And we have this indirect case with the loudspeakers that were turned around. And there the modifications after the direct sound really completely destroyed plausibility. The localization was completely somewhere else. The scene did not make sense anymore in itself, and it was rated super bad. And the interesting thing is that with the modifications that started after the mixing time, everything was good again. There was even almost no audible difference to the original. So this is interesting to keep in mind. With the indirect case, we had a very low energy in the direct sound on the listening line where you could move, right? And the early reflections of these directional loudspeakers, they were up to 14 dB louder than the direct sound in these listening positions. So they kind of dominated the perception, and if we don't get this right in that case, then it's really completely falling apart. So that gives us a bit of a better idea of which is the tolerance range in which we can work. So if we are in front of a loudspeaker, we can really do with the early reflections whatever we want. And maybe if we want to use this for music applications and we want to create this virtual surround sound setup of loudspeakers, of virtual loudspeakers, for example, maybe it's even interesting to not have early reflections at all because they cause comb filter effects and that could be avoided. That's maybe nice for the music experience. So this is all pretty interesting, a pretty interesting field of simplification, which doesn't seem to matter perceptually. Yes, okay. So I think that this also shows that this is a critical test scenario for interpolation and extrapolation algorithms. So I have seen a lot of papers proposing interpolation methods for BRIRs, and most of them really tested that just in front of the loudspeaker, in a listening position that was like with very strong direct sound, And there, it doesn't matter. So it needs a critical listening scenario to really test the interpolation methods properly. Yes, after the mixing time, we can do a lot that we know. And the image shift effect, so when the early reflections affect the localization, that is quite critical for the audiovisual plausibility. Okay, but then we have another interesting scenario for audiovisual plausibility. I don't want to tell you much about that at the moment. I just want to be to give a little teaser for that. So that is a VR experiment where we can see this nice bedroom, for example, and also a kitchen, diner room with 2 reverberation times that are like moderate. And there we have different zones where the participant can go, and there's this kind of diffracting edge or like a boundary. So if a participant is here, cannot see the sound source. So what do we expect in this case, audiovisually, right? So I mean, just seeing this raises a certain expectation of what we want to hear there. And if we don't get it, maybe plausibility will break. But that's a study that will be presented tomorrow by Joshua Manel. And go there, it's interesting. I don't want to give you the results now. I don't want to steal his show. But maybe one spoiler, diffraction of course matters for the plausibility, but all the details will be given by him tomorrow. But it's a really interesting case also to discuss how the visual impression influences what we expect, right? We cannot say it doesn't matter, because it does. Yes. So, I mean, there are many more parameters that influence what we expect in certain augmented reality scenarios from what we want to hear and how the virtual sound source will integrate properly in the target environment or in the natural environment around us. And we conducted a literature study, a quite intense one, and came up with this kind of framework. I have to say that for this presentation now, I added the transfer there because the concept of the transfer plausibility is also well known already, and I think it integrates very well, because here we can see this transfer, like how the actual environment and what we perceive there, how that influences our internal reference and what we expect to hear. And of course, the general listening experience plays a role, and adaptation and prior exposure, and rooms we know, there we have a different expectation than in unfamiliar environments, and also like the interaction with self-motion. So if we walk towards a sound source and it doesn't get louder, for example, we might notice that something is wrong. So it also has to go in line with this modality, right? So that all contributes to listener expectation, and this has to be met to create plausible auditory illusions in the augmented reality case. So, so far we only talked about auditory illusions in rooms we know. So we could go in there, conduct measurements, or do some simulation that kind of accurately reproduces this room. But the actual challenge, but also the actually interesting case is when we don't know the environment. So we have to analyze the environment, and if possible in real time, of course, and then adjust the rendering to that environment. And that's a challenge, and there have been also interesting approaches. Really a good number of super interesting ideas have been proposed and successfully implemented, but so far we are not in a place where we can say this really works. So if we just go to different rooms, and the virtual sound source will always be a nice part of that new room. Currently, that's still not the case, at least with all the systems I checked. If you think you have a better one, I'm happy to listen. So it's also not that I have a perfect solution for that. We also have this kind of vision that we later on want to modify the real environment, like the appearance the appearance, the audiovisual appearance of the real environment. So if somebody is too loud, we want to make them quieter, for example. So really modify what we maybe don't like, or so that's also an interesting vision for the future, and that requires even more careful scene analysis and scene resynthesis, and I think all of that is just possible if very efficient algorithms go together hand in hand with a very good understanding of the human perception, and I think there we still have lots of room. I think we are still at the beginning with that, and especially the content-aware considerations, or content-based considerations can be very interesting there. So, for example, if we have a virtual bee that's flying around us, maybe the localization, if that's off by 2 degrees, maybe that doesn't matter too much, right? Because maybe we don't even see it; it's somewhere behind us. But that's very different from like when we stand in front of a statue and that should talk to us. So there, the audiovisual alignment is super important, that it really comes from that mouth of that statue, right? Otherwise, it will not be a convincing illusion. So I think there we can also still explore a lot, where we can simplify the representations or the details in which we have to render the sound field. So just another short thought, because of course AI plays a big role in all these parts of this diagram. But in preparation of this presentation, I tried to come up with a nice visualization of a virtual sound source, and I asked ChatGPT to generate one for me, and it was pretty difficult. So we had a longer conversation, and it came up with different virtual loudspeakers that did not look at all like what I thought a virtual loudspeaker would look like. But the picture I liked the most, I've brought this here because ChatGPT said, this image has now been updated to feature exactly 5 identical loudspeakers in the living room. And this is what I was presented. So, I mean, I see 4 identical loudspeakers in the front and several more in the back. So maybe if we are good and smart in how we use AI in all these challenges, maybe we can also be the first to get the number of sound sources right in the generative AI. Maybe that's a goal. I'm basically at the end of my talk and just want to summarize the take-home messages. So one thing is, of course, AR can improve the lives of people, so let's make it work. Known rooms, there we can achieve authenticity, or at least the acceptance as real with the virtual contents. In general, for all the challenges that are waiting for us still, data sets are needed. There are really still too few data sets that give us training data, or also just room for statistical analysis of different rooms, right? So there we can all help, maybe. Then what I want you to take home, audiovisual plausibility is a more critical construct than externalization. I've seen so many publications focusing on externalization, but audiovisual plausibility is really more sensitive to incorrect room representations. And for evaluation, turn around the loudspeaker. And yes, for unknown rooms, only smart combinations of efficient algorithms and perceptual optimization can succeed. And sound design can be explored to create plausible illusions. I think there is a lot of room for exploration, and also a lot of room for psychoacoustic tricks to make it work. I want to thank my former group in Ilmenau, also with Karl-Heinz, who couldn't be there when we took the picture. And I also want to thank the group in Surrey. And that's my talk, and I'm happy if you have questions.
It's kind of a dumb question, but I have to ask it. So you said audiovisual plausibility versus externalization, and you said that, I believe on the last slide, your summary was that plausibility is more, did you say it was more an important factor than externalization?
No, I think just that externalization is there for longer, even if we have more deviation in the room acoustics. Externalization might still be there, but audiovisual plausibility might have been gone already.
So my misunderstanding or my confusion is, can you, for me, disambiguate externalization and audiovisual plausibility? Can you just give me kind of a basic
yes.
definition?
So if we have a real loudspeaker that is standing there and we use headphones to let that play virtually, and we have this virtual sound source being slightly positioned in front or at the side or behind that loudspeaker, then it's still external, but audiovisual alignment doesn't work. So we don't have the illusion that this loudspeaker is playing this
from that
music.
point, from that visual point. I see.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Still early.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, yeah, thank you so much for the great presentation, Annika, and yeah, another round of applause. All right, so we'll continue our schedule. I believe we have a break until 10:30, so feel free to make use of the coffee and the snacks next door, and we'll resume workshops in this room at 10:30 and paper presentations next door. Michelangelo, see you in a bit.